My name is Van Jones, and you may see me on CNN sometimes. I am also the CEO of a new organization called the Reform Alliance. Jay-Z and Meek Mill and about 6 billionaires have decided that they want to help make criminal justice more possible and more powerful. So I'm happy to be here representing the Reform Alliance. And we are going to have a discussion about an issue that probably, even as recently as 5 years ago, would not have been considered a top issue, but it's become probably the most dynamic issue on a bipartisan basis in the country, which is criminal justice reform. And as governors, you have a tremendous opportunity to make a huge difference because about 90% of all the people who are locked up at the state and local level. 95% of them are coming home. And so the decisions that are made by governors are going to have a massive impact on whether they come home better or bitter and whether they succeed or fail. And so what we wanted to do was to have a conversation with some of the leaders in this space. Governor BRYANT from Mississippi. You don't think of Mississippi as a place where a lot of reform in this area would be happening, and yet under your leadership it is. We want to hear from you. We also have Governor Wolf from Pennsylvania, who is leading a red-blue effort in his state to get a lot done. Meek Mill's case really lifted up some of the issues there. I'm sure you'll talk about that around probation and parole reform. And also Mark Holden is here from Koch Industries. We've been doing this sort of left-right thing together for a couple of years. So just welcome this panel. We're going to have a great discussion. Why don't we start with you, actually, Governor Wolf? Obviously, Meek Mill got sent back to prison for a really minor little non-crime infraction, and that turned into a whole global movement around doing something on probation and parole reform, an issue people hadn't really thought that much about. And now you've become an outspoken champion on that issue and so many more. Why have you taken up this issue of criminal justice reform?
Well, it's an important issue, and as you point out, it's absolutely bipartisan. And I think the reason for that is that it is wrong, and I think people recognize it's wrong to basically exclude folks from the economy, from our society, from our neighborhoods for a lifetime simply because they might have made a mistake early on. You mentioned Meek Mill, who's from Pennsylvania, was consigned to, 14 years of probation, and his last infraction was popping a wheelie. That's the kind of thing that is just wrong. But it's also not very smart. We exclude those folks from our economy. We exclude them from gaining good jobs in our businesses, paying taxes, helping our revenues. It also costs a heck of a lot of money to incarcerate them. In Pennsylvania, we have a big drop in our prison population, and it has saved us a lot of money in our fiscal record. But one final thing, I've been in politics for 4 years. Before that, I was in business. And like most business people, for most of the time I was in business, I automatically excluded anybody who had any brush with the law. We did a background check. You had a record, you did anything, you were out. We didn't even interview you. And we decided in maybe 6, 7 years ago to say, let's give a second chance here, see what happens. We think we might actually get better employees. And this was during the recession. We didn't have to do that. We had plenty of people applying for jobs. And we found that they made better employees.
Wow.
And so,
why do you think that is? Why do you think that
they're trying to prove something?
They have got something to prove.
You interview everybody, and you make your best judgment. But this group is a self-selected group, and so we found that we actually did better with the second chance folks than we did with a random, giving them, the interviews and holding them to very high standards. We actually did better with our second chance folks. So this is the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing from a fiscal point of view, and it's a smart thing to do from a business point of view.
Governor, I want to bring you into this. A lot of people have talked about the First Step Act, which I was proud to play a role in, along with Cut 50 and Koch and a bunch of other folks. people did not know that we had a secret weapon in convincing Donald Trump that this was smart policy. And that secret weapon is sitting to my left, only physically to my left. Can you talk a little bit about how do you convince and how did you convince, as such a strong conservative, your legislature, your community, and the President of the United States that now is the time for criminal justice reform?
I think it helped being a conservative. I think it helped being a former law enforcement officer. I'm a Republican, conservative, former law enforcement officer. I was raised a Baptist, married a Methodist girl, and I believe in this movement. So when people come up to you, governors, and they say, oh, that's that sort of soft on crime, hug a thug thing, it was hard for them to tell me that.
Yeah.
I put a lot of people in jail, and I found out doing that they have families, and they have mothers, and they have children. And so there is a world that they live in that sometimes we could not comprehend. And so we went to Bedminster. Jared Kushner called me and said, we want you to come up here. We're going to have a little meeting on criminal justice reform. I said, well, that's just my thing. We did it in 2014 in the state of Mississippi, and everybody looked and said, that's impossible. There's no way that you're going to have corrections reform in Mississippi in 2014. And I had legislator after legislator come into my office, and we had counseling sessions, and we had prayer. And they just said, Governor, I can't vote for this and go back to Jones County. I'm just going to get killed over it. And I said, I'm going to call your sheriff right now, because his jail's full. And he's having to pay for everybody in that jail. And a lot of them made stupid mistakes. There are people that need to be in prison. And then there are people we're just mad at. You know, if they go do something wrong, maybe they're taking drugs and they get trapped in that cycle of addiction, they break into your car, you're mad at them. Do they need to be in jail for 20 years? No. So we went to Bedminster, and I remember sitting in that room, and we had Governor Perry there, and just a very small group of us that were there in the room, and the president came in, and he said, all right, Jared, you got me here. I really don't want to do this. And Jared said, well, Mr. President, I'm so excited we're here. We have a very entertaining opportunity here, and I want to turn this over to Phil. And that's how we got started. And for the next hour, the president was sort of, no. And he has a big heart. I know he has a big heart. And after the meeting, I went and talked to him and said, you're the only president that can do this. You're the only guy that can do this. President Obama couldn't have done it because, quite honestly, a lot of us probably would have, people would have screamed and hollered, oh my goodness, he's going to turn them all out on our communities, and it's going to be pillaging and crime, and there they go again. But when Donald Trump was able to do it, along with Mark and his team there at Koch and other conservatives, like Rick Perry and other governors across the country, people said, let me listen to this. Maybe I need to stop shouting and listen a little bit. And it's just been absolutely remarkable. And it was an evolution of the president. It was him calling and saying, Phil, let's talk about this again. And Jared Kushner just never giving up. And I think it's one of the most important things he will ever do. I know it's one of the most important things. We have another bill in front of us now, the Next Step Act in Mississippi. So I can let those that are coming out get a driver's license. And so professional licensure, so they're not automatically excluded when they walk in to try to get a contractor's license. And they said, oh, you've been in jail? Get out of here. Nope. So we're going to pass a law that says you can't do that. They have to have equal opportunity to apply for that license and maintain that license. A lot of those that are in prison today.
That's a real big deal. That's a real big deal.
A lot of them are in prison today served in the United States military. So they wore the cloth of the nation. And we're not going to turn our back on them because they made a mistake. That's what I told the president. That's how it works.
Hey, listen, brother.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, man. You know, there's something about this issue that is bringing out the best in both political parties. It's bringing out the best in all races and classes of people. There's just something about realizing that we are not who we say we are when we say that it's liberty and justice for all. Republicans believe in liberty, limited government, individual respect and dignity. mass incarceration is running over that principle now. Democrats believe in justice, sticking up for the little people, that kind of stuff. The justice part's good, but liberty and justice for all is getting disrespected now by too much incarceration. And you have been, Mark, a voice early calling attention to this among libertarians and conservatives. Talk to us about this and First Step and anything else you want to talk about.
Well, thank you, Van, and thanks for having me here today. So this is an issue that we've been focused on at Coke for a long time. We very much are focused on barriers to success, people who are kept from being able to succeed, whether it's education systems that don't work, or like the governor mentioned, occupational licensing that is a cronyist system. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, the criminal justice system is the biggest barrier to opportunity for millions and millions and millions of Americans, and it has been forever. And so I'm with Koch Industries, so we see a lot of failed big government programs. Sorry, everybody, but we just do out there. And I would say that the criminal justice system is among the biggest failed big government program. It's a pay-to-play system. As Brian Stevenson says, if you're rich and guilty, you get a better deal than if you're poor and innocent. That's fundamentally unjust, just at the headline, right? So we look at it as a situation. We need a criminal justice system. There are people, as the governors have said, who need to be in prison for a time. Some may be longer, some may be shorter. But everybody's coming out. And the whole idea is that we have a system that really respects public safety. And we have a system that's based on equal rights and equal justice. And then the last piece, we need a redemptive system, one that provides second chances. And we look at it from a moral perspective that we've already talked about. The constitutional perspective, it's amazing how much is in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, about criminal justice reform. 40% of it deals with that. Bail reform was pretty much something that we're talking about now, but the founders got it immediately right, which is it shouldn't be excessive. It shouldn't be based on resources. None of this should be. It should be based on risk and safety. And we haven't been doing that for the last 40 or 50 years, unfortunately, because we got derailed by the war on drugs, which is a big issue, but we didn't fight it the right way. It's really tough to declare war and win against an inanimate object when you're talking about people and different aspects of it who clearly some of the people involved need to be incarcerated. But a lot of the people who get caught up in the system are sick, are poor, may have mental health issues, and putting them in prison doesn't do anything. The last piece is the fiscal piece. We've talked about this, and that's why the governors get involved and engaged. And it started in Texas, and there's a number of governors here today that are doing the same thing now, and I'm really reluctant to start naming them because I'll leave someone out, but we've got from Louisiana, Governor Bell Edwards, we've got Governor Burgum from North Dakota, we've got many, many others here, Governor Bevin, et cetera. And the reality is it started, like I said, in Texas, and what Texas has shown, that being smart on crime, not tough on crime, not soft on crime, smart on crime and soft on taxpayers is the way to go. And you're able to, like they have, reduce their crime rate to they haven't seen this low since the 1960s. And that led, after that, they've closed down 8 prisons, saved billions of dollars. Bottom line is, many other governors, left and right, have gotten engaged and involved in this now because it's good stuff. And they all come in for the savings, but more importantly, they stay for the salvation, because that's where the good stuff is. And that's what we're seeing.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Preach it.
But when you say they come in for the savings, they come in on the fiscal question.
Exactly.
But they stay for the salvation. What do you mean by the salvation?
If you've ever seen, for example, Governor Deal, former Governor Deal, I've seen him speak 4 times, and he's crying every time about it, what he did. And he's rock rib conservative, you know what I mean, all that stuff. And he talks about seeing these individuals who come into prison who are just lost and broken, and then they come out better because there are education programs. They're getting drug therapy. They're getting cognitive therapy. They're getting over the trauma that many of the people in the system suffer from. As many of us know here, most of the people in the criminal justice system, again, there are people that need to be there. I'm not saying otherwise, but the overwhelming majority come from really tough backgrounds. And so dealing with all that trauma, dealing with all that, what Governor Deal has seen and what we've seen now coming into the federal system is there's a way to make this all work. We put people in who need to become better while in prison. So we'll have prison reform. We will have education programs. We'll have vocational programs. We'll have therapy, et cetera. People get better while in prison. In some places, there are incentives. If you do the right thing, you can get out earlier potentially. And then on the other side of it, try to keep the people coming in slowing down that with common sense sentencing reform, either diversionary programs.
Fewer going in. And
Fewer
treat them
going
better
in,
when they're
others
there.
who are going in are getting better, coming out better, not being returned. And so that's the whole idea. And that's why Texas has been able to close prisons. That's why other states have been able to do it. And we're at an all-time high for safety in this country. That doesn't mean there aren't issues that we need to deal with, but we can deal with them better when we're not locking everybody up. Last thing I'll say, the First Step Act is a first step, but it's a huge first step at the federal level. When you've never done anything before in the federal system to make the system less punitive, more redemptive, and more restorative, and give people chances like this, second chances, it's a big deal. And we're very excited about it, but there's more to come with the First Step Act. And the most important thing that has to happen, I think, is obviously it needs to be implemented right. And we're going to be on top of that, as I know you and your team are as well. But at the end of the day, going back to what I'd like to say last thing, I'm sorry, I keep saying last thing. What Governor Wolf was talking about, we have hired people with criminal records at Coke since I've been at Coke, which is going on 24 years. And for us, it's the right thing to do. We think it's a good thing to do. It helps people. But for us, it makes a lot of business sense. And here's what I mean. There's an estimate 1 in 3 people in this country have some type of criminal record. So if you're going to use a box on your application to say, I can't even look at this person, I'm going to judge him by this one piece of paper that says he had a criminal record, you're going to throw it in the trash can, that doesn't make sense to us to reduce your applicant pool by 1/3. And so what we've seen is by hiring people, giving people a chance to explain their situation, that's one data point to look at. We've got a lot of people who need a second chance, who are hungry and humble, like the governor said. And in some places, they're our best employees. And I always get questions, well, won't you have to do your diligence? Aren't you afraid about this or that? In this day and age, you need to do your diligence whenever you hire, make any hiring decision. We've hired people who have the best credentials, and then they screw up, they steal stuff. And then we hired people with criminal records who are so hungry and just want to do the right thing. And so for us, we just see it as a win-win-win. It's good for the employer, good for the individual, and then good for society, because you got someone coming back in who's not going to be a threat to public safety. That keeps law enforcement safer, makes their communities better, enriches all of us, and then become taxpayers.
Yeah, good. I want to come back to you. We mentioned the business thing. Part of the thing that I've been observing, I had a TV show called Crossfire with a guy named Newt Gingrich. And it was called Crossfire because we did not agree on almost anything. But we discovered that we agreed on this issue. And we began working together, and that's how I met you and the whole deal. And there's this kind of growing, almost secret society or sorority, fraternity of people who are very strong partisans. This is not the kind of bipartisanship for the mushy middle. This is the bipartisanship of the wings, very, very strong partisans, but who just feel that our values in both parties are not being respected by what we're doing. And it seems to me, Governor, that some people focus on sentencing reform, fewer people going in. Some people focus on prison reform, making sure the prisons are making people better and not bitter. Other people focus on reentry, making sure when people come home they have second chances. But it almost doesn't matter where you start. At some point, you are going to want to see more done throughout the system. You are, I think, uniquely positioned to lead on this reentry effort as a business leader, as somebody who cares about probation and parole. Can you talk about two things for us? One is, I think most people don't know how broken the probation and parole system has become. There's 6 million people who are under the control of the criminal justice system. Only 2 million are locked up. 4 million are caught up in this probation and parole system. And you hear, oh, well, this person violated parole. You think they're a carjacker. You can go back to prison for being 15 minutes late for a meeting with your parole officer and lose your house, your jobs, your kids. I mean, I could not survive on probation or parole if I were going to go back to prison for being 15 minutes late. I was 15 minutes late today. So how is this going to get fixed in your state, and you're passionate about that? And what can governments do to help businesses make more of the choices that you decided to make as a business leader on reentry?
So I don't know how many questions were sort of embedded in that.
Just two, probation, parole, and reentry.
I think that, first of all, everything we do in criminal justice reform is a jobs bill. This is about getting people back to work. And we have to look at every aspect of it, from incarceration, sentencing, actually before sentencing, to bail reform. Pennsylvania, I think, is the first state in the country, is still the only state with clean slate legislation. We'll seal your record so that that's not in your permanent record when you go to apply for a job. But one of the key things, as we've seen with Meek Mill and others, is the issue of putting a cap on probation, the period when you're in probation. First of all, we have to do a lot of things to make sure the time you're in probation is important, and that you actually, it does contribute to the restorative function of the criminal justice system. But after 3 years, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It's not going to work any better. So 3 to 5 years seems to be where most states are in terms of caps. Some are higher than that. Pennsylvania is one of the few states without any cap, which means that someone like Meek Mill, who does a wheelie, and the judge just apparently doesn't like Meek Mill, you end up with 14 years being on probation and no end in sight for doing a wheelie in some place outside of Pennsylvania. So I'm not even sure why that would matter in any case, but it certainly doesn't help Meek Mill, who is ready and able to make a great contribution to our society. It doesn't help anybody who's in a position to get back into the swing of things, help their family, help their community, help their economy. All those things are thwarted by having a bad criminal justice system. It's a jobs bill. Everything we do, no matter what stage, it's a jobs bill.
That's great. I'm stealing that. That's great.
I stole it too.
You stole it too?
I stole
it. We're going to go to Q&A in a second, so I'm sure you guys have a lot more questions and that kind of stuff. But, help me understand your passion for this. I mean, you really have been one of the few people who make such a, you transitioned from business, you went right from business to being in charge of a state. You've been incredibly pragmatic, incredibly effective. You were reelected. Why is this so key for you as an issue? And what would you say to other people who are in elective office about taking on this challenge?
Well, I think, as we've all said, this is the holy grail of politics. You can bring extreme right, extreme left together because it's not only fair, it's smart. And it actually gets people back into the economy. That helps all of it reduces the prison population. That's expensive, over $40,000 per person in Pennsylvania. We've reduced it by $4,500. We're still working. Our crime rate is down. We can close prisons. We can do things that actually takes the money from that, which is not a very good investment, to things like schools, to things like roads and bridges, and things that actually make lives better. That's really important. And I don't think anybody, whether you're right, left, could look at this and say, I don't think I really like the outcome here. I mean, what's not to like? You have more people working. You have more people who are employable. You have more tax revenue. You have fewer expenses. It's something that brings us all together in a moment of unity.
Now that the public safety question has been addressed, in other words, you got 35 states now that have seen a reduction in their prison population and a reduction in the crime rate at the same time. So suddenly, you're not by yourself if you say, well, let's see if we can keep moving this thing forward. I know that there are questions, and I believe there's an opportunity for you to ask some. We've got a very strong, pragmatic Democratic governor up here. We've got a very rock-wib conservative governor up here. Both have been able to find, you got a red-blue state, you got a red state. And both have been.
And, as we were just talking to the governor, we reduced our prison population by 11%, saved $46 million. Now, you want to get a legislator's attention, you bring in $46 million he didn't have. So what we're doing now is the next bill, the next step in Mississippi, will be to make sure that they invest that in a reentry program. Because they took it, rightfully so, they're appropriators. I was in the legislature, nothing better than being able to spend money helping education, transportation, law enforcement. So they were putting that money back into the general fund. And so this year I'm saying, whoa, okay, stop that. Give it back to us. Because I've got to get reentry programs. We've got to get these folks back into the workforce. I've got 41,000 job openings in the state of Mississippi. 41,000. We used to have people looking for jobs, and I got jobs looking for people. And a lot of them made mistakes, and they're going to come back out. They're going to get out. 99% of them, 98% of them are going to get back out. So you have to be prepared to do that. We were talking earlier about how this only works about 30% of the time. About 35 to 50% will commit another crime within 3 years and be back in the system. Any other agency, any other government entity that would come in and say, Governor, I need some more money because I'm productive 30% of the time. We'd say, get out of here. No, I'm going to fire you and hire somebody that can run that thing. But that's what we do. And we just sort of were ignoring it. So 11% reduction, $46 million, and our crime rate's gone down. What's not to like about this? Now, there's going to be mistakes. Some knucklehead's going to get out of prison and go commit a violent crime. It's going to happen. Get ready. And our friends in the media are going to come running and say, this is one of the guys that got out because you had reform in criminal justice. And so you have to own it. You have to own it. You can't say, you know, well, you have to say, absolutely. And I'm sorry. It's dreadful. It breaks my heart that that happened. But look at all the other thousands that are out working, that are taking care of their children, the moms that are back in their homes with their families. So go talk to them. But you're going to find out, and it's going to happen. Just suck it up and keep moving. Because as I told the president, I think at the end of the day, it's all about this. It's the right thing to do. It is just the right thing to do. I'll hush.
Well said. You know, nobody gets in trouble when we hold them in there for 20 years and send them out more traumatized, and then they do something bad. We say, well, that's on them. So I think those of you who are trying to send them home better deserve more credit.
And then we put a fine on them, so we put them in debtor's prison. We say, after you get out of prison, you got to pay off your $10,000 fine. How's that going to work? He's been in prison for the last 4 or 5 years, and he can't get out until he pays his fine. So we did away with what I call debtor's prison in Mississippi.
Well, we appreciate you. Governor Scott. Absolutely.
I'm curious what you're doing in other states in terms of youthful offenders. I mean, we're going through that right now, and we're at a crossroads about where we go in the future with this particular program. So I'm just curious what you're finding throughout the states.
Yeah, you're talking about
youthful offenders, yeah.
Yeah, I think criminal justice reform knows no age boundaries. We've got to do a better job throughout. But one of the areas, I think, that in one of the many areas, bail reform. You can go to jail in most states now if you're arrested. You're not guilty of anything, but you've been arrested, and the judge says, okay, $50 bail. Well, you don't have $50. You're 15 years old. And so you get in jail you're put in jail until the trial comes up. In some places that can take months. That's debtor's prison. That's even worse than here you haven't done anything, and you're in jail simply because you can't come up with $50. I think there are a lot of things that we can do to make the system fair, so that whether you're a young person, whether you're middle-aged, whether you're an old person, you aren't going to be trapped in any way by a system that should be trying to get you back on your feet rather than hold you and warehouse you.
And we found most of that is mental and social issues. So you've got to get them to a mental health center somewhere. Get a mental health professional with that child. You get 16-year-old kids that are breaking into houses, that are committing crimes. There's something going on in his life that's really ugly. My children didn't do that. A lot of children don't do that because they have wonderful homes and they have parents that care about them, and they get up on Sunday mornings and go to church, and those children don't. They didn't get to do that. And so we are working really hard. I mean, immediately I went to our Department of Mental Health and said, you got help here, because these children are just lost. We created the Child Protection Services, a whole new agency. Try that as a Republican. And say, I've got to have an entire agency that does nothing but worry about children every day. I got a Supreme Court justice to leave the Mississippi Supreme Court and come chair that, be director of that agency. So our adoptions have doubled in the last 2 years. We made it a lot easier for people to adopt children. And then we pour as much counseling as we can into their lives. That's the only way you're going to help turn that around.
Can I say one thing?
Well,
We got another question.
you can answer it as you answer Governor Brown's question. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you very much. In Oregon last year, we were able to use data to reduce some possession of controlled substances penalties from a felony to misdemeanor, because we saw very clearly its impact on African American and Latino men. And I'd love to hear from the panel experiences you've had in terms of tackling this issue from a race-based perspective. We know that obviously the impacts for men of color are devastating for women of color as well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and how we can attack the problem from that perspective.
Well, I think decriminalization of possession, I think what you've done is really important. But I think going beyond that, just a broader look at mandatory minimum sentences. The Republican senator who supported really draconian mandatory minimum sentences in Pennsylvania had a conversion and is now in favor of moving away from that. I think we need to actually move back from the stuff we were doing 20 years ago in this country across the board, not just in possession of small amounts of things like marijuana, but decriminalize a lot of activities that really should not have been criminalized in the first place.
Governor Herbert.
Again, thank you to the panel. I think this is a very important issue. Let me make an observation and then a question. One, I appreciate the fact that Congress is finally catching up with the states.
Takes them a little while.
And we had an initiative a few years ago talking about the states that really are finding solutions to people's problems, because we are actually engaged. It doesn't matter whether you're a red state or a blue state or a purple state. States are leading the way. And I'd hope that in all of our different respective opportunities and roles to have forums, particularly those of you in the media, will have an opportunity to say, look to the states. They're the ones that are finding the solutions to the problems that we have in this country and are probably the best hope for the future of this country. We're not as dysfunctional as we see in Washington, D.C. We actually
That's a
get
very
things
low
done.
bar, sir.
I know. Unfortunately, it's the only bar we've got, and it is unfortunate. But states are doing a great job, and I know that criminal justice reform, we passed our bill 3 years ago. Before that, we had mental health courts, drug courts. We've done a lot in trying to find ways to treat and rehabilitate people as opposed to warehousing. And again, I know that's probably a common statement for most of the states here. My question is, what are we doing, and what are you doing, respectively, in the states, the governors, to reduce recidivism? Once you're in the prison system, even if it's a short period of time, how are we helping people to transform back into civilian life and not have this revolving door of recidivism, which we see too much in the criminal justice system?
One, first you got to get them clean and sober. I remember telling the president, the first thing we got to do is get drugs out of the prisons. And people that don't know it sort of look surprised, like, they're getting drugs? Oh yeah, they get drugs in prison. So you got to get them clean and sober. That's the first thing. And then a really designed reentry program, as we talked about earlier. So the way we had prison designed for the longest time, it's a miracle that anybody made it. Because we did everything in the world to keep you from getting back out, finding a job, being able to support your family, and staying out of trouble. We wouldn't let you have a driver's license in Mississippi. We wouldn't even let you go hunt. That's really torture. So you couldn't get a job. There was a box there, you know, have you ever been convicted? Yep, well, thank you very much. We wouldn't let you get a plumber's license. We did everything. We just said, what else can we do to make sure that guy coming out never gets back? 99%, about probably 98% of the women in prison, drug-related. One of the things, Governor Brown, I wanted to talk to, I'll tell you what really got a lot of people's attention, opioids. So we started putting people's neighbors and sons and fathers in jail for opioid. So now it's just not the guy in the alley with some drugs. It's the guy next door that's getting arrested for a bad script and trying to get more opioids. So, oh, okay, wait a minute. Our guys are getting arrested. Oh, we need to do something about this. Yeah, welcome. Yeah. Welcome. Come on in. Yeah. So, and trying to make sure in prison they're not assaulted, because sexual assault, it was so prevalent, and imagine the horrors of that. So making sure that you try to make prison a safer place, a drug-free place, and a place that people can learn, get their GED, learn how to weld. I've got inmates right now welding. and they're really good. And Ingalls came in and said, I'll hire every one of them to build warships in Pascagoula, Mississippi. That's how bad we need welders. They're doing a heck of a job. And when they get out, they got a job. So they go get their driver's license. They go right down there. They get certified as a master marine welder, and they're making $50,000 a year. Does he want to go back to prison? No.
No way.
Let me just, two easy things you can do immediately. One is Medicaid takes 90 days to get on. We used to terminate people because when they come into the prison system, we have our own healthcare system. It would take them 90 days to get back on Medicaid. We simply went to suspending it rather than terminating, and then they could get back on Medicaid the day they came out. If you don't do that, for 3 months, basically, if you have a substance use disorder problem, you're going to be a real candidate for coming right back to prison. Second thing is we started giving them identification, IDs. If you don't have an ID, those are two things you could do immediately and would really help the recidivism.
That's good. Look, I know Governor Russell wants to get in. Are you trying to get into, Governor? All right, so look, let's just take, let's take these last two questions from the governors, and then we'll answer them both at one time. Go ahead, Governor.
Okay, well, thank you for the great discussion. Many thoughts, but as I was hearing the discussion, our previous panel was about workforce development. And it seems like these two conversations need to mesh together. In Puerto Rico, we have a task force working on the concept of prisons as education systems. And I wanted to first, seeing sort of the pipeline that all of you have laid out, less people coming in, better people coming out. There's a little pragmatic link in between that's worrisome and that I'm seeing in Puerto Rico, which is sort of the connection. Once you get better people out, how do you actually connect them to the business sector and how? So I'll say some of the things that we have on the drawing board, but I really want to get your thoughts on the matter, about how we give or take away incentives to businesses for getting people involved. How, if we're having this broader conversation about education and workforce development and different levels, why wouldn't prisons be just the perfect or a very good pilot ground to make some of these apprenticeship programs start and have a binding commitment after they go on to free society to continue on? So my 3 points are thoughts on that overview of having prisons as a school system, or as schools, as we've been calling, how to actually make that link, because, eventually we want this to be a cultural change, but there's going to have to be some sort of a runway while we sort of force a little bit of that interaction. And lastly, if this shouldn't be really a part of the discussion as well with the labor, with the workforce development.
Okay.
Go ahead.
There are so many states that are doing this now, but one, and I don't want to take one out of context, but Michigan, in my opinion, is the gold standard. Heidi Washington is the head of corrections. I see the governor's not here. I know Iowa's doing great work too. And in Michigan, they have an education program that's run by Calvin College, and they get skilled up, or educated, first. And the details, the studies show, the statistics show that people who get in-prison education programming are less likely to recidivate, almost 48% less. And for every dollar spent, it defrays up to $6 of future incarceration costs. They also have a vocational village where they have these individuals coming out, skilled up, mechanics, carpenters, electricians, you name it, and they're getting jobs, some of them six-figure jobs, and they're not going back to prison. It's because there was a need for a workforce there, and that need was met. And so that's something that I think every state should try to do. Last thing I'll say about the Michigan experience is that they provide scholarships to the people in prison, their children, for Calvin College, if they want to go to the college, free of charge, if they if they want to go to college, which is a way to break the cycle as well.
You got called on, and I'm not going to let you get away, Governor Reynolds from Iowa, without saying something, and then you get the last word, Governor.
Well, I'm chomping up the bit over here because I love the conversation that's taking place, and states are making a difference across this country. We, for the last 3 years, have been offering apprenticeship programs in every single institution that we have in the state of Iowa. 24 different apprenticeship programs, 320 people plus are participating. We've had 162 people that have completed. We are holding job fairs within the institutions before they get out so that we can start to make sure that they go right into a job when they leave. We're getting them the driver's license before they leave, so we're working on getting that. We're just trying to eliminate as many barriers that we have. Here's another pilot program that a couple of, Iowa is one of the states that are participating with the Department of Corrections, offering Pell Grants to those that are in our institutions. Right now, we have 420 inmates that are participating, and get this, they're earning an average GPA of 3.5. So they are taking advantage of it. It's working. We're doing employer liability shield legislation this year as well. But there's so much that's going on, and it's working.
Well, we're proud of you.
Let me just say one thing. To that, but there are a lot of things we can do in the prison system. But to the governor's point, I don't think you need to do anything to encourage employers to employ. What
No.
we need to do is do a better job of saying, here's a really good pool of future employees.
Wonderful. Governor Bell Edwards.
Thank you, Van. Louisiana for decades had the nation's highest incarceration rate. In 2017, we passed and I signed into law 10 bills, modeled after what Mississippi had done, Texas had done, and so forth. We've already shed that title, and it's a good thing for the state of Louisiana. But one of the things that's missed is we are actually safer as a result. The crime rate is down. The recidivism rate is down. And what I was going to suggest to others, one of the 10 bills actually requires us to know what the baseline spending was, and 70% of the savings have to go back into the criminal justice reform movement. In fact, the whole act was called the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Act. And almost all of that, not all of it, but almost all of it goes into reentry, because 95% are going to get out. And if you don't have a successful reentry, by definition, you create at least one new victim of crime. And so it's working in Louisiana. I had the pleasure of being at Bedminster. I was the bipartisan part of that meeting.
That's right.
That day. And I will tell you, that was a tremendous experience for me to be able to see folks coming together, and that's how it should work around the country and in our states. But
I agree with you. Well, listen, we are at time. I just want to say in closing, this has been a life-changing experience for me. As everybody knows, I'm on the left side of Pluto. You cannot get more progressive than I am. I'm considered to be a progressive in California. You got to work hard to be considered a progressive in the Bay Area. And it's changed my life. I've got friendships I would have never had. My dear colleague Jessica Jackson with Cut 50 was in the Trump White House this week. They were celebrating Black History Month. And President Trump stopped his speech in the middle and reached out to an African-American woman who was one of the first women let out from First Step, and gave her the microphone, and she spoke from her heart. And there were people with red Make America Great hats cheering and crying for this African-American woman who had finally got a chance to come home, because we finally got together and did something.
Amen.
And I'm just telling you, this has changed my life. You know, Jessica Jackson, I always have to give her credit, because she's the one that really led our efforts, and let's give her great deal of credit. I believe that there's something about this that's bringing us back to who we are as an American people, and both parties are going to be greater for having taken on this challenge. And I just thank this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.